Welcome to Chat Cyber, a podcast on all things cyber policy where we explore key issues and discuss policy strategies with industry experts.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Chat Cyber, Cyber Florida's policy podcast. I'm your host, James Jacobs, and as always, the lovely Miss Jordan DeUlis is with us. Today we talk to Dr. Tad Schnaufer, a good friend of this center. Tad works over at our sister institute, GNSI, and today we're going to have a conversation about the conflict in Ukraine and Russia's aggressions on the cyber front. It's a very interesting conversation. We appreciate you guys joining us today. Jordan, let's get into it.
So I'll just give a brief overview of Tad's background. So Dr. Tad Schnaufer is the Strategy and Research Manager at the University of South Florida's Global and National Security Institute, or GNSI. In this position, he oversees the planning and execution of GNSI conferences and events, and he manages the Institute's internal research and publication program. He is also the host of the What's Really Happening podcast. Dr. Schnaufer earned his undergraduate degree from the University of Florida, where he received his commission from Army ROTC. He has served in both line and airborne infantry units and is a graduate of Army Ranger, Airborne, Air Assault, and Pathfinder schools in the Combat Advisor training course. He earned his master's degree in global affairs from New York University and his PhD in security studies from the University of Central Florida. He has several publications in scholarly journals, as well as a book chapter in the Challenge to NATO, Global Security and the Atlantic Alliance. So we were really excited to talk to Tad today. As James mentioned, he gave an overview of the conflict in Ukraine. We talked about the Russia's cyber operations historically and throughout the conflict. And then we also talked about theoretically what the state of Florida could do to be prepared to respond to a cyber attack. So awesome conversation. We are really happy to have Tad on with us.
Welcome back, guys. As we said in the intro, we're back this week with our old buddy Tad from GNSI, our sister institute, to speak with us today about the Ukrainian conflict. Tad, I really appreciate this, man. Tad and I work very closely behind the scenes. We share a boss in General McKenzie, and I've been very, very impressed with Tad, his depth of knowledge, his service to the country, his experience. I think we're in for a great episode today. With that, I think we'll jump right into the questions, if that sounds good to you, Tad.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. Honored to be on this amazing podcast. Looking forward to the great content we put out today.
Perfect, man. So we have a running joke around here that we haven't employed in quite a while. That is, if you can explain it in a way James can understand it, the audience can then barely understand it. So everybody's aware of the conflict in Ukraine. You'd have to be under a rock at this point not to be vaguely aware of what's going on. But can you give us a brief overview of what's going on over there? And I mean, you can get in, I say brief, but get into the depths of it. Let people assume people don't understand the historical background that led us to where we are.
Well, in the end, particularly as we will obviously go into cyber operations and cyber policy, but a lot of the cyber lessons learned for the war in Ukraine start right before the conflict actually started in 2014. So when this conflict really started coming to fruition. In the lead up to the initial Russian annexation of Crimea and fighting in the Donbass, which is eastern Ukraine, in 2014, there was a number of cyber attacks throughout Europe where the Russians were testing their cyber capabilities. And as we saw the Euromaidan protests in 2013, which the Russian-backed government was looking to go more towards the West, possibly with a deal with the European Union, President Putin saw that as unacceptable for the Ukrainians to be completely in the Western camp and decided to intervene. And that's where, like we said, we saw what's called the Little Green Men, which were Russian troops with no insignia occupying the peninsula of Crimea, which they still control today, and then also supporting rebel separatist groups in Ukraine in the eastern Donbass region. So starting in 2014, you see Russian aggression in Ukraine. You see a hybrid warfare campaign, as some call it, which includes a lot of cyber operations throughout the country, looking to destabilize the pro-Western government of Ukraine, and then also to support the rebel groups in eastern Ukraine, as well as solidify their control of the Crimean Peninsula. And just to ensure overall that from 2014 up until 2022, that conflict simmers, and they're trying overall to keep Ukraine from entering either NATO or the European Union, or in general, just not get closer to the West. During that 2014 to 2022 timeframe, so that's 8 years, you see a number of different operations, everything from Russian agents were operating in Ukraine, like we mentioned, cyber attacks on civilian infrastructure as well as government. And then you also see, again, a actual kinetic conflict with sniper fire, some artillery exchanges in the east. Now, the current war, which is obviously the one that's making the news now, is really just an extension of that initial conflict, but going from a small scale, low intensity conflict of 2014 to 2022 to a large scale invasion in 2022, where Russia actually has a large conventional army, over 150,000 troops, invade Ukraine. And coinciding with that invasion is a large number of cyber attacks throughout the country to try to weaken the Ukrainian response. Obviously, the Ukrainians were able to fight back. They were able to overcome a lot of that initial attack. And then we have what we with the war today, where the lines have shifted during the first year from 2022 to 23, but really the lines have stagnated for the most part. There's been some small incursions in, like the Ukrainian attack in the Kursk region of Russia, as well as the front lines in eastern Ukraine. But for the most part, the war is small or kind of held up on the front lines right now.
So, Tad, you mentioned a few times some cyber attacks or cyber operations that Russia's utilizing. Can you tell us a little bit more specifically about those cyber attacks they have utilized historically and also throughout the conflict that we're seeing today with Ukraine?
Sure. And we can see a history of Russia kind of experimenting with cyber attacks throughout Europe, going back all the way, particularly in 2007, where there was a massive cyber attack in Estonia, which was a relatively new NATO ally. The Estonians were looking to actually remove some Soviet monuments and move them out of the capital of Tallinn. And the Russians actually are accused of conducting some major cyber attacks in Estonia, which really amounted to a lot of denial of service attacks, so DOS attacks, where you're, in a sense, the attacker or the aggressor in this case is denying citizens of a certain service, whether that's a bank or government office. So starting in 2007, you start seeing an increased number of Russian cyber attacks in Europe. We see a number of them with the Russian invasion of Georgia in 2008. And as we look now at the Ukraine conflict, we see them starting in 2014, or starting in 2014 in a big way up until today. So what do some of those attacks look like? We saw attacks on critical infrastructure going back to 2014, 2015, where Russian cyber attacks, and again, attributed to Russia, I should say, or Russia-backed individuals, because obviously we all know with cyber attacks, it's very hard to actually pinpoint who's doing it and where it's exactly coming from.
It seems like most of our major adversaries always like to work through on third-party groups anyway when it comes to cyber.
Absolutely, and in many other ways. I mean, the Russians, they used the Wagner Group famously before. So being able to have that element of deniability is crucial in these operations, because it's hard to know, is it just a random hacking group or is it the Russian state that's conducting the attacks? And we've seen that throughout the Ukrainian conflict. But their earlier attacks were focused on critical infrastructure, particularly energy. So they were able to shut down large energy grids in Ukraine in 2014, 2015, oftentimes leaving hundreds of thousands of people without power for up to 6-7 hours before the Ukrainian infrastructure could catch back up. They were able to shut down telephone networks and telephone relay towers, so you wouldn't be able to make phone calls, things like that. And you can see that this disrupts civilian applications. Obviously, if you lose power, that's a problem. If you can't make phone calls, that's going to inhibit your day-to-day life. But you can see that application morph into how it creates unrest, because you're not sure what's going on. And also, you can see military applications. If you're about to launch an invasion, it would be good that people can't communicate, that they don't have power to conduct their daily activities, so they're not as likely to possibly resist.
Ted, can you explore that a little bit more? You know, one of the things, I don't have a military background, I know you do. One of the things I've learned from Ernie, our director here, as well as General McKenzie, about what makes the American military force so special is basically our logistical capabilities, our ability to rain force down on anywhere in the planet within 24 hours. And one of the things that I've learned in this role is how imperative the cyber component of that has become in our modern society. Can you share a little bit more based on what you've seen through this conflict, what are we learning about the integration of cyber operations and military operations? You touched on a little bit there, but how does one impact the other?
Sure. I mean, obviously, there's a huge relationship between cyber and military operations now. I mean, the U.S. military has created another domain of war, which is cyber. So you have the typical ones that land, sea, air, right, space. But then you have cyber, right? So that domain of warfare is crucial for military operations because so much happens in cyberspace that we might not think about, whether it's communications. And if you use the broader definition of cyber and extend it to how signals are sent, you can also, loop in GPS under that and a number of other operating systems. So if you're able to conduct a cyber attack with a virus, you can quickly disable a military's ability to use that technology, which is advantageous to military operations, such as GPS or communication. So how does a military force operate when their communications are jammed or knocked out via maybe an introduction of a virus or a cyber attack? And this goes also to the civilian population because military operations typically don't happen in a vacuum. It's not just a battlefield with just soldiers. You see a lot of urban combat, right? Fighting in cities and areas. So cyber attacks can also knock out critical infrastructure so that the opposing side cannot use water facilities. They might not be able to use power plants. Several Russian attacks, cyber attacks, over the period of this war from 2014 until today have been on actual Ukrainian energy infrastructure, particularly power plants, including there was a noted attack in the 2017-2018 timeframe on the Chernobyl nuclear power facility, where they actually knocked out, or not knocked out, but they limited the capabilities of radiation detectors and a number of the facility infrastructure. So they're able to. So then the Ukrainians manning the power station have to shut it down, make sure all the safety protocols are met. So although it doesn't necessarily, blow anything up, it disrupts normal day-to-day operations. It slows things down. It makes people react. And the military, during military operations, obviously you're going to have to also deal with that. If you occupy a city of a couple 100,000 people and there's no power, whether that power was destroyed through a bomb or cyber attacks, irrelevant. The fact is you're going to have to somehow maintain order. So you have a dual line. Even though it's military operations, there's still that civilian component, which is very important.
Ted, we've touched a lot on Russia, and I wonder, do you know what the offensive defensive capabilities of Ukraine have been in the cyber domain during this war?
Well, what we've seen is that as the initial Russian invasion, a full-scale invasion in February of 22 started, a massive cyber attack hit key Ukrainian infrastructure, energy infrastructure, as well as government websites to deny information. So, you're getting attacked. You see Russian troops in your backyard. You don't know where to get key information, as well as, again, trying to shut down the ability of the Ukrainians to respond to the invasion. As time has gone on, those attacks from Russia have changed more to intelligence gathering and engaging target-specific operations. So instead of the broad base kind of trying to shut down the government, it's been more specific. And the reason we see that shift is that Ukraine had developed a decent cyber defense over the course of that simmering conflict we've spoken about from 2014 until 2022. They learned a lot from prior Russian attacks. In addition, they had a number of private partnerships, which is crucial for cyber defense, whether they're working with Microsoft or Palo Alto or one of these other private companies to be able to create firewalls and then also respond when they do have a breach of their cyber networks. So the Ukrainians were pretty prepared before the conflict. A massive attack, cyber attack by the Russians in conjunction with their conventional force surely disrupted things, but the Ukrainians were able to respond and then maintain a level of cyber defense that caused the Russians to shift tactics.
Yeah, so being in the state of Florida and discussing, the disruptions that Russia uses to target critical infrastructure, things like that, theoretically, what could the state of Florida do to be prepared to respond to a cyber attack? And we talk about this to help inform policymakers, but also because we've been, on the receiving end of these attacks from Russia or allegedly. So what could the state do to prepare to respond to a cyber attack, to protect our critical infrastructure, all the things?
Yeah, I'll just say all the things. Right? The thing is to note is that the actors here, before we get into that, is the different actors. You have the state actors, obviously, Russian propped up, hackers or units, but you also have hacktivist groups, so hackers groups that are acting on their own. We saw in the initial invasion of Ukraine, groups like Anonymous, which is pretty famous, conducting their own cyber attacks against Russia, for example. So you get this reverse, or assisting the Ukrainian government in defense of their own cyber capabilities. So one partnership, as noted, is crucial for the state level would be with private industry. We see a great model for this partnership in the Finnish government. The Finnish government has a whole national security complex plan, which includes what they call total defense, which ties their government in with civilian infrastructure in case of a certain attack. So even if it's an invasion or if a cyber attack, they do that through a number of education programs. So educating the normal citizen on cybersecurity, because although you might think Russia cyber attack is this crazy major attack that a normal person can't react to, but they certainly can. A lot of these attacks come with through either email spam or ping flood, as you might have heard, that technique where you flood a server with comments or questions, or you just have 400 people keep calling the same help desk to deny service, right? So a normal person understanding, particularly if they're a government employee, because that's the way that oftentimes these viruses get in, is they get a government employee who's a random employee in the government, not really cyber related or even defense related. They click on a link, and now within the government server or the government platform, that virus spreads. So education's crucial. Understanding what's suspicious, what's not, is one thing, because you're trying to stop that attack there. Obviously, backup systems, being vigilant with updates and firewalls are crucial for the state's programs. And then also letting individual infrastructure nodes that are separate from the state, whether you're talking about the port authorities, whether you're talking about banking systems, those all have to be secure too, because the state, as we would know, has a vested interest in all those operating, because you don't want to cause chaos, have chaos amount, which is what the Russian strategy is in Ukraine. They want to create chaos. They want to create distrust in the people on the ground, and then also deny not just trust, but information. Because if you don't know where the information is coming from, you're not getting it from a government site or a trusted site, you don't trust it. And then you as an individual, you're kind of operating in a vacuum of no information. You just see all this chaos going on around you. And it's harder to maintain order that way. So that's one, education's pretty crucial, educating the population, firewalls for the systems. And then also, how do you get around that information piece? So let's say government, through a denial of service act attack, government websites are shut down. How does the government still communicate with its citizens? And that's crucial. So whether you could use old school, radio broadcasts, Florida Emergency Broadcasting Network, something like that. We're using old school radios or AM radio. You could just, again, part of the education process. If we lose connectivity through a cyber attack, we will communicate via these other means, which are not corruptible through cyber attack. So that's one possible, advantage. What's our redundant systems, or as you might hear, analog systems, your non-digital systems that are not susceptible to a cyber attack?
Ted, we usually try not to use this platform as much of an infomercial, but I have to plug here the program the state of Florida stood up through Cyber Florida, the Critical Infrastructure Risk Assessment. Yep. We've gathered good data there for the state legislature, but we've used that to turn it into a program as well to support critical infrastructure around the state of Florida. So if you're a policymaker, or if you work for a critical or somebody or an organization defined as critical infrastructure, it's a good point to let folks know Cyber Florida does have some resources to help plug these gaps. And as you said, Tad, it's vitally important, not just for state of Florida's government, but for every bit of our critical infrastructure, including ports and power and water. And these are all the usual suspects of victims to specifically Russian attacks, but foreign actor attacks in general. So Just wanted to throw that out there to our audience. Please remember we have those resources available.
Yeah, and like I said, there's a lot of countries doing a lot of work on this. One, there's a lot to learn from what the Ukrainians have done, again, with private industry throughout the war, because they're suffering or they're being attacked by a lot of cyber attacks and a lot of testing grounds to see what works and what doesn't from both sides, defense and offense. But again, looking at some of the other European countries such as Estonia or, as I mentioned, Finland, they have their, like I said, security strategy for society, securing the vital functions of society. Where again they have an entire 100-page document on, okay, if we have a cyber attack, what ministry is in charge of that? Who do they coordinate with within the banking system, the infrastructure? How do we ensure we have redundancy within our infrastructure? So first, you're trying to defend against the cyber attack with your firewalls, your updates, education of your workforce. And then if something does happen, how do you continue operations if your systems do go down? So that's the next level. So you need that 2-level approach to ensure that you can continue to operate, whether you're a bank or you're a military, unit.
Well, Tad, thank you for your time, man. I told the audience at the beginning they would enjoy this one. You know how much I appreciate you. You're so knowledgeable about this stuff. Your lived experience through the military and your research background. It's a fascinating conversation. We appreciate it. Jordan, do you have any closing thoughts before we let Tad go?
I don't think so. Thank you so much, Tad, for joining us. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much. Looking forward to our next talk.
Welcome to Cyber Florida's Shameless Plug with Jordan.
Be sure to check out the Chat Cyber policy platform on cyberflorida.org. This is where we will post various policy papers or responses to requests for information from organizations like the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency or the Office of the National Cyber Director. We will also post studies and reports that come out of Cyber Florida. So, for example, we have a cyber readiness in Florida's K-12 public schools paper coming out shortly. We also are writing one on cybersecurity regulatory harmonization. So just be sure to visit this website. It's a one-stop shop for all of the resources and position papers, policy papers, reports, studies that come out of Cyber Florida. I'm Jordan. That's my plug.
All opinions expressed by the Chat Cyber podcast participants are their own and do not exclusively represent the views and opinions of Cyber Florida.